Hello and welcome to today's webinar, where today we are looking at what property strategies are hot right now and which ones of those, of course, might be relevant for you. To kind of help me through this kind of challenge, I have none other than Vik Singh. Hi, Vik. How you doing?
I'm good, Paul. How are you doing?
Yes, I'm really well, thank you. Really well, really well. Slightly strange. I'm actually in the office today, which is a sort of a strange thing. Kind of, I think COVID becoming a thing of the past. All kind of exciting, really. So let's crack on. So just so people don't know who Vik is an investor developer. He's the founder of a company called Elite Mindset for property success. So looking at how you get your mindset in the right place to do well in property. He's also a trainer and speaker at Fielding Financial as well. So sort of big on mindset and big on kind of business coaching as well. So I suppose really, Vik, just to kind of introduce you and kind of perhaps help the audience get to know you. So why do you sort of feel mindset is so important in the property sector? What's that all about?
Well, it did not start that way. It just after I got into the property and I realized when I look around many of my colleague property investors and around there, why only some people are able to continue on the journey or able to do so well, whereas the others cannot or others don't. And it was not very difficult for me to find out one thing that keeps them going is actually the mindset, because you would agree and all our viewers will agree, it's a proper roller coaster ride.
Sure.
And we need to have that kind of perseverance, that attitude that we can keep on going. And I had to do something because I could not stop when I had the awareness that something can be done to help my colleagues. Then I started putting things together, and I'm a big advocate on personal development. And property mindset has allowed me to start focusing on as a mindset and business coach. And if it wasn't to do with the property, possibly I would not be actually living the purpose of helping people out on the mindset on a general and property basis.
Okay, cool, interesting, cool. And I suppose kind of same question: why sort of trade and speak at Fielding Financial? Then kind of that all kind of aligns with that, does it? Or
Fielding Financial, I very much resonate with the values, because the integrity and the whole training structure, which does not teach you, okay, you do my training and you will be millionaire next month. It's just going up, bottoms up. And Jill's mission, which is light the spark of financial possibility for as many people as she can get to. And it really resonates that. And what I found out when I got into the Fielding Financial, it's actually whatever, basically, it's a non-profit making. So whatever comes in goes back to the students. And that's one of the reasons why the education has been such a big focus. And because that's the place I started, and I was able to build myself a portfolio. So if I am financially free today, the credit goes to Fielding Financial, and I adopt all the strategies and all the teachings in my journey. So when I had the opportunity to give back, then I actually, went out with both hands. Let me contribute wherever I can. So
amazing. Brilliant. Well, let's kind of jump in next. We start getting with some content. So let's sort of talk about some property strategies, how we set ourselves up to succeed and kind of how we can be kind of efficient with those, executing that stuff. So I pass over to you and get you to perhaps start sharing your screen and crack on, if that's right.
Yes, absolutely. Can you see my screen there?
We can, yes. Yeah, 2 fundamentals, what you need to know. Amazing.
Well, just want to get into straight in. And Jill has been investing for 43 years. And she discovered...
So Jill's the founder of Fielding Financial, is she?
Yes, Jill Fielding she is the founder of Fielding Financial. And after 20 years of her investing, she recognized if she knew these 2 fundamentals at the very beginning of her journey, she would have achieved in a couple of years what it took her around 20 years to achieve. And the first was understanding the nature and importance of evidence. The available facts information indicating whether property investment in the UK is profitable, long-term sustainable. That was one. And the other one was understanding the importance of strategy, which is plan of action, which can be designed to achieve our goals, really. So if that's something which resonates, like first it needs to have a factual information that the ride I'm taking is worthwhile. And secondly, the action plan, which I'm going to employ. Now, today we're going to be talking about strategy only, Paul, so won't have time to go through the evidence, but straight into the strategy, because our topic is talking about the hot property strategies we have got. Sure. Now, I don't want to, I'm sure everybody has heard commercial to resi, commercial to resi, commercial to resi. On social media, YouTube, you name it, everybody is talking. So I'm going to share about how we can capitalize commercial to resi. I'm going to talk about the staycations. Now, we know that we're all staying home, traveling within the UK. How is this an attractive strategy? And social housing, supported living, which I'm actually investing myself, just to, how our viewers can capitalize on this strategy specific. So let's get into the commercials and residential PD and airspace PD. Now, we have heard about Class E we've been hearing it from the last 1 year. So I don't want to get too much of Class E. We know that with the Class E, we can do the conversion into multiple dwellings up to 1,500 square meters, which is literally almost 10-fold, because initially maximum we could do was 150 and now it's 1,500 meters. Literally, that's a massive boom. And again, for those who will speed up and take the opportunity, will definitely be able to enjoy those benefits. Now, a few things I want to highlight. The first is the Class ZA. Now, Class ZA, when we are talking with Class ZA, it allows us for the demolition of either the single purpose building, which can be detached block of flats, or a single detached building could be B1 to use, which needs to be under B1 until the 12th of March 2020. And it can be replaced with a single purpose block of flats or the single purpose house. Now, you can do with up to 2 additional stories. So basically with that one, if you demolish the building, you can go from the original up to 2 stories height. Now, interesting, there are few conditions there for sure. It can have as many floors of the original building plus 2 floors not exceeding 18 meters height or 7 meters from the original building. Another requirements, it cannot exceed more than 1,000 square meters. And the building must have been constructed by 31st December 1989. It really fascinates me how they come with all these dates. Really. 31st December 1989. I like that. But anyways, now this is very interesting strategy. But one thing we could really look into, if the building is already 5 floor tall or a 6 floor, is it worth demolishing the building and start all over again? So we need to be looking at the building again, which is not really working for its purpose very well, and up to 4 floors possibly. So we can demolish and add 2 floors to enjoy the maximum. But if we are in a position whereby the building is already a 6 floors high, how we could utilize? Well, we could utilize Class A, because with Class A, what we get, it allows us to add additional 2 floors on the purpose-built detached block of flats. Now, it does not work with the B1, but with the purpose-built detached block of flats. Now, a few conditions there, which I learned is the building has to be 3-story high already, must not exceed 30 meters in height. And one date I really would like everybody to write it down, because somehow again they came up with this date which is across the rest of the use class I'm talking about. The building we will be talking about in the next few classes, the next use class as well, has to be constructed between 1st July 1948 and 5th March 2018. I just would love to know the history of these days, to be honest. Now, on this use class, the height of the highest part of the roof of the extended building would not exceed the highest part of the building more than 7 meters. Which means, in all fairness, we could go up to, we can look into the detached block of flats up to the 8 floor, up to which has got 8 floors, and then we can add 2 more on top of that. We can't really have it up to 5 and think we can add 5 more floors. We can only do up to 7. So that's very interesting. Then just to share, when I'm driving around and I stop my car on the side and I start counting buildings, my friends sometimes say I'm crazy, because this is the opportunities you start to see when, as an investor, you start to see, okay, well, what can I add in terms of growing into my property portfolio. So this is the class A, which again, we can do new flats on top of existing flats. Now, another one is class AA, which is new flats on the detached building in commercial or mixed use. Now, it allows us to add flats on the detached and commercial building. Now, you could utilize literally class, in this one, class A1, A2, A3, B1A, batting office, and you can go as high as 30 meters with the finished development, subject to the additional height of 7 meters over the surrounding roofs. And that is very interesting there. The dates, again, 1st of July 1948 to 5th March 2018 is still the factor. Now, a couple of things needs to be really, really careful with this class AA. First of all, neither the current or the future flats can be C4, which means we can't use them as the HMO. And the construction, the additional stories, has to form a part of the principal part of the building. So basically, we can't really go on the sides and start developing. It needs to go on top. And again, when you are doing the prior notification to the council, which is 8 weeks or 56 days, we need to add the supply of all the floor plans, number of dwellings, list of all the addresses in the flat block when you put the planning application. Often with this specific one, you have to have a flood risk assessment given, but there could be other requirements from the council that could be required for this AA. Now, the next one is AB, which is new flats on terrace building in commercial or mixed use. Again, the AAAB, AC, and AD, which I'm going through, are somehow similar with few differentiation. Now, the construction time got to be it's the same. You can't do a HMO there. Additional story has to be a principal part of the building. And in this one, you can go as high as 18 meters with the finished development, subject to the maximum additional height of 3.5 meters in case of single, and 7 meters if the surrounding roofs have more than single stories. So that's with the AA, and then AB, you can build the new flats, in the AC, new flats on the terrace building in use as a houses as well. So again, the principle remains the same. The only difference here with the AC and AD here is that the AC, in class AC, the highest part of the roof of the extended building cannot exceed the height of the highest part of the roof of every other building in the row of terrace building, which forms more part of more than 3.5 meters. Am I putting too much on the wordy there, Paul? Or is it actually getting quite clear of where I'm coming from?
Yeah, I think it's clear. Yeah. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, it's good.
Because I mean, the use class can be very, very, very interesting at the same time. I mean, I like planning, so I enjoy learning this one. And for some, it could be very wordy, but I would encourage everybody. Yes, you don't have to be a planning consultant. I must tell you, you don't have to be, but to have that basic knowledge that when you're qualifying the deal, having me this basic knowledge on this planning use class allow me to basically qualify or reject the deals literally very, very quickly. And that's the beauty of that one. So all these use clause, which I just really, I mean, there's so much detail we can get into, but I just wanted to really give a bit of a synopsis on the use clause that we can use for our benefit apart from clause E. So we can actually, we can start to use the airspace literally from class A, AA, AB, AC, and AD. We can use the airspace to go up to the heights. AC and AD are the new flats on top of residential terrace and residential detached property. Whereas the AA and AB, it's either detached mixed use or terraced mixed use properties. So principally, if you look into, it's not very confusing. I mean, I have got a sheet of papers with me, which I keep it with me because I can't remember all of them with me. But this is actually could be quite useful for the users to work out your strategy and see which direction you are going ahead when it comes to commercial to resi. Shall I move on, or do you have any question on that one, Paul?
No, that's fine. We've got a comment in the chat about the sound quality actually, and people sort of struggling to hear. Could you just check with the audience if you can hear us okay? Can you just type in okay into the chat and just click return, just so we can get a sense check. So Ankary's struggling. So yeah, so most people are saying it's all fine actually. So I think we're all good. I think Ankary, that probably is your end actually. Yes, I think everyone's. Yes, great. So we'll keep cracking on. That's your end, Ankary, I'm afraid. So we'll carry on. Brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Okay. Anything on more commercial to resi? Do you want to go through anything else, Paul?
No, it's very interesting, really. So I think when all these came out last September, one of the things that we started trying to break it down and sort of say, well, actually, what are the kind of component parts that make it all up, basically, and really what I came back to was, Class ZA is one thing, which is commercial buildings, knock them down and build flats on that space. And then you've got this kind of mixed usey in my head, shop with a couple of floors of flats above it, where you go up sort of above that in effect, or kind of a detached block of flats that are all individual, and you just kind of, a single block where you sort of go above on top of that. And then you've got the houses and terraced houses and stuff where you go above those. And really it was kind of in my head, whilst there are sort of 5 or 6 different classes that apply to it, the core principle was really, flats on commercial buildings, or knocking commercial buildings down with flats on top. It's a block of flats that you go up or knock them down and go up. And then it's kind of terraces and kind of houses that you then go up above as well. And I thought was kind of also interesting is that some of that, I think it's AC and AD, you can actually have the extension as extending the building, or indeed having additional units on top. And so I kind of also thought it was kind of interesting from that sort of that, I suppose, asset value, asset management and kind of asset sweating piece on buying residential and going up. That can be just make a bigger house, or it can be for additional units above it, depending on the location you are.
Absolutely, because on the AC and AD, if it's a single story property, you can go up by one story, and if it's a terrace property as a minimum of 2, you can do 2 and up to the 18 meters height, which is very interesting, because we would, so when I invest in Bristol, and the terrace houses are 4, some of them are 4 stories actually, and say, well, is it really a house? But again, yes, you can still take advantage up to 18 meters. And often we can, again, for users, you can calculate 3 meters per floor as a minimum. So if it's 18 meters, we're talking almost 6 floors there. If it's 30 meters, we're talking 10 floors really. So thank you for adding that. You made it look very easy, how you explain. I really like that, Paul. Thank you.
Fabulous.
So the next one is the staycation. Now, staycation, I'm sure we all know, is the holiday we spend in our home country rather than abroad. So there was a recent research, when I say recent, it's only last month in July, why staycation is becoming so popular and is here to stay for a few years now. And that was a research was done from 2000 holiday makers. And what they came up with, the reason why it's very popular, because 31% of the people are choosing the staycation because of the personal transportation. They're not feeling very comfortable going with the public transportation at the moment. That was pretty interesting. I mean, I always personally enjoyed personal transportation, but again, people are really avoiding public transportation. It's easier meeting friends and family. Yes, we have had 18 months of
yes, no interaction yet.
yeah, one place where the holidaymaker said we could just bring family friends as well and rent few units. That's very nice to hear. 25% wanted to focus on the UK economy and supporting local businesses, which was very interesting, which we need that, but that was pretty interesting. And another element was the quarantine challenges, because we've known, like some of the individuals been to Europe, and certainly government said, oh, if you're not back by that day, you will have to quarantine. And some of the people have to literally, change all the tickets. And literally that was again one of the reasons why people are very comfortable staying in the UK. And yeah, we are seem to having a reasonable good weather as well. And so hopefully we'll continue. So these are the fundamental 5 reasons that came about why staycation is going to be very popular for the next few years. The couple of things I really would like to add for our property investors to remember. Now, one interesting element with the staycation is that it's very profitable. And sometimes we over leverage the borrowing because we know that we can actually making much more profits. Now, that's the one thing I want to add there, just to not to over leverage your borrowing and apply the return on investment qualification rule for buy-to-let on your staycation in case the demand shifts and you have to go back to the buy-to-let. That's the one element I would encourage. Couple of recommendations there. Focus on workcation-oriented staycation, because now people are traveling now out there with families and they still be working, but they really want to be not living at the place. That is becoming quite a big trend. When you are working on a staycation, focus on flexible and transparent cancellation policy, because people's plan change, they'll be more inclined to book your place and you will have a much higher occupancy. Stay flexible to, the third one is stay flexible to the last minute bookings, which means make sure your power team is ready even at 4 o'clock in the evening because the client is coming at 6 p.m. So that type of the promptness. And finally, I'm sure we all know that super fast internet and broadband. Literally, I cannot emphasize more. All of us have worked in homes for 18 months now. It is really important that can really make and break in terms of the staycation, the occupancy, and the feedback. So
just so I'm clear on this is something that I haven't done particularly myself, and so it's something kind of intrigued really. But this is kind of the principle of you take your buy-to-let portfolio and you re-let it through Airbnb on a nightly basis or a weekly basis or something like that, or perhaps Booking.com or something like that, and you sort of drive much higher yields off the back of that, provided you're in the right locations where that sort of stuff works. That's kind of the general principle of this.
Absolutely. I mean, apologies, I should have explained at the very beginning what staycation is. Yes, we are letting the property out on nightly basis. So basically the same thing, the same principle you mentioned, like bookings.com, lastminute.com. Even on bookings.com nowadays, people have put their properties in.
Sure.
So you're charged on a nightly rate basis. And one thing, I mean, I personally prefer the holiday rest like Airbnb, because I prefer to stay in a property which has a kitchen, which has a lounge, which has a bedroom, because I've got a little one. It's much easier for me to be in that space rather than booking a hotel and a small, literally 4 meters by 4 meters room. So
yeah. I know that feeling well. I equally have a little one as well. I have a 2.5-year-old daughter, and last year we went up to, was it last year or the year before, we went up to Scotland to go kite surfing, and my wife and I were sat in the toilet eating dinner while my daughter was going through a sleep regression in the bedroom next door, and since then it's like staying in hotels is not a thing that we can do at the moment. So I know that feeling well. Hence the Airbnb stuff is very attractive, isn't it, at the moment?
Absolutely, and it is there to stay because people start to like their space, and again offers much more than a hotel room, and the pricing are not even very expensive. At times you'll find it cheaper, but you have a whole house or a big flat to yourself with the decent parking arrangements, and often you can find something even outside in the resort like areas or even in the city center, and that's why it's becoming so popular.
Sure.
But the reason I wanted to mention about not to over leverage, because the demand shifts all the times. Literally all the time it shifts. And I'm going to give an example about one of my own property. So it's always to be aware that we are focusing on rather than the best case, but the worst case scenario as well for the sustainability of our property business model.
Sure. I think just while we're kind of on that note, maybe I'm sort of disappearing off topic, so feel free to bring back onto topic. But I guess kind of my job is kind of to keep us on topic rather than sort of disappear off. But if my understanding is there's some quite interesting kind of tax savings and like that. If you go staycation, you rent stuff out on a nightly basis. My understanding is then you're kind of some of the challenges around buy-to-lets and not being able to set your interest off against your tax and this sort of stuff. That changes when you start going staycation, doesn't it? It becomes commercial letting in effect, and therefore you can set your interest off against tax and that sort of stuff. Is that right?
Ideally, because for the normal rental income, we are not a VAT. We are not. We don't have to pay VAT. But when you actually staycation becomes a part of a business, then you end up paying VAT. Now, staycation again is not very regulated at the moment. It's not very regulated, but I like to think in the time to come, it's going to be regulated like something like a HMO, whereby we'll have to be compliant with not only taxation, but also the other fire alarm regulations as well. Now, in my property in Windsor, it's a really good point you made there. I've already put the alarm like I would have it in a HMO for my Windsor staycation property, because I know in the time to come, they are going to be more and more compliant. So that's again another angle to consider. If somebody is starting, it might be a good idea to really wire it everything for future, like what we call a Lego model. So just and have it ready for tomorrow, today.
You're refurbishing anyway, then future proofing is really important, isn't it? So I totally agree. Amazing. Sorry, we'll get back on topic now. Sorry, I'm just kind of interested in that. So
that was a good point. And the third one is social housing. And social housing, again, is the property that we let out to council, charities, housing associations. Now, I work with my local authority, and it is becoming now, because I talk to them literally on a monthly basis. The demand, one of the reasons to consider that there's an existing massive demand around the country and many councils, and it's keep on adding up. And we don't know when the furlong scheme will be all ended, and that's what they're scared of right now. In September, what impact will it have on the social housing? So the existing massive demand, and it's constantly adding up. The other benefit of working on the social housing is that you can secure long-term tenancy, anything from 6 months up to 5 years. And again, we have seen as the buy-to-let investors that people stop paying and you can't do anything for 6 months. So again, you can have a secure long-term tenants, and there are not going to be no voids whatsoever. You can optimize revenue, but building relationship is the key. And I must say, it is not easy to get in. But when you are in, you can actually optimize your revenue massively. Initially, when I had to, because my property in Windsor suddenly was empty in the middle of pandemic, and people were not traveling at all. I had to literally call 15 to 20 days in a row to speak to somebody to do a deal on that property. And since then, the property has been 100% occupancy. Mental health and well-being on the rise. And that's another, because it is more in the aware, more in the know now, whereby the government will have to make a lot of efforts in terms to ensure that people are well looked after than ever before, because the COVID has really had added a spark in literally everybody. It's just the mental well-being need to be there. So that again going to impact the social housing. Now, if you want to get into work with local authorities, housing associations, and charities in order to actually capitalize on social housing, because it's a massive area. We're going to have a supported living, social housing, and their needs are going to be very different. You know, I had a meeting with a local charity, and they actually run 3 different divisions based on the needs of their clients, and every need they pay differently to every different clientele. Depends upon the need, depends upon what they are seeking out from them. So that's very interesting because it's quite a big market. But again, I definitely really see this to be a good opportunity for property investors as quite a hot strategy.
Sure.
So next one, I'm going to look into how to set yourself to succeed. You know, first is get knowledge, get educated, know the rules of the game. You want to get into commercial, want to get into development, know the rules of the game. And we know that we have just finished Euro, and 90 minutes of hard work can be actually done in literally 30 seconds of mistake, and penalty can cause us to lose our game. And it's no different in property. No different in property. So learn the game, have all the tools, resources that is going to help you to continue with your journey. And next slide is for me sharing the strategic pyramid, which we use as a Fielding Financial. As I mentioned earlier at the very beginning, we believe in bottoms up. We're just teaching students to how they can start from a single buy-to-let and going up to the fancy pants, which is the development I'm going to be referring shortly. So just very quickly on the pyramid. Now, the way the pyramid has been designed, again, designed by Jill Fielding herself. At the bottom, we're having low risk, low income, and as we are going up, high risk and high income. So in properties, there are only 2 money-making strategies, 2 ways to make money. One is through income, which puts money in your pocket every single month, and the capital that gives us the cash lump sum. Now, on those strategies, both of these strategies plays. At the bottom, we have an income tier, basic 1 to 2 bedroom buy-to-let, which should give us a minimum of £100 per calendar income. As we go up, we have a capital, which again, a fancy word, basic buff and fluff, literally a lick of a paint, changing the carpet. And now doing all the work, the property should go up in its value by 5%. And as we move up, we have a sharers and HMOs, which is high income, high risk. A property should leave us £1,000 per calendar month income once all the expenses are paid off. And when I got to this training, I love this one because I have to have many of the HMOs because it actually gives us a lot of income. And that's most of my portfolio, 80% of my portfolio consists of HMOs for professionals alone. And again, the further up, we have a capital tier, which is flips. Here we extend the property sideways, backways, and upwards. And in this strategy, once you've done all the work, the property should go up in its value by 10%. And at the top of the pyramid, which again falls into the commercials to Resi and the strategies I have mentioned today, is the fancy pan deals, which is a super development. So what I've done is to expand the fancy pan pyramid into further tiers. Because yes, I mean, again, conversion of 5 flats is a development, and building Westfield is a development as well. So how do I know where do I stand, where I need to be focusing on? So again, we have stretched the pyramid from. Okay, so we have it's supposed to have a very nice animation. Apparently, it didn't work, so apologies. So basically, the top of the pyramid has expanded into 4 tiers, which is start with the minor development, which is units up to 5 units, which can be converted under prior notification, permitted development, or super HMOs. What I define super HMOs are the HMOs 6 rooms or above, where you have to go for the planning. Then we get into the mid development, whereby we're looking at the unit size up to 10, or under affordable housing. Then we have a major development whereby we're looking at the unit size from 10 plus up to 100 or 100,000 square meters and below. And finally, on the top, we're looking at the super development, whereby we're just literally taking a land and building 100 plus houses. And here I'm talking about if you have to build Westfield or building a big retail park. Here we are talking about the 100,000 square meters and above, literally. So this is how we could really look into the different set of developments. And this is what I've just explained. Now, one question, Paul, I get to ask, and one thing which I must say was very frustrated, because I did a training education literally many places when I wanted to do development. Developers was really close to me. I wanted to do HMO, but I wanted to really start building block of, tower blocks. And one thing which again was very, as I mentioned, a little frustrating, that whenever I learned something, when I went for the education, say, oh, you can go and build a block of flats yourself. Or you can just buy a piece of land and just like build 10 houses. Just once you have done my 3 days of education, which I found to be literally had to take it with a pinch of salt. And I had to come up with a model which can allow students to have clarity on, to establish where they are on their journey and how they can grow up, as we're talking the bottoms up. Now, being a mindset coach, I understand we can't put any limitations on us. But when we have a good plan, it can help us to succeed. So let's divide CERT model, which I meant, which is like a certification. I call it CERT as in certify, to certify your development. The first thing we look into the CERT model to qualify what stage you need to be focusing on is look at the cost. What is the contribution, the financial contribution you're looking at? Are you going to be leveraging either your money, you're going to be borrowing money from angels, JV, crowdfunding, bridging? What is the cost financial exposure you are looking at? That is really important for an investor to understand. The second is the effort and experience. Are you in a full-time job which demands 12 hours of work Monday to Friday? What effort are you willing to put in there? And if you are not going to be there, who is going to be assisting on the development or the property development you're looking at? And the next is the experience. What have you done so far? Have you just done one buy-to-let and you want to do a 20 flats development? Are you doing it by yourself, or are you doing JV with somebody who's very experienced? So what experience you can have, and experience can actually assist massively on the lending itself. And again, will favor the development properly. Next is the risk. Now, what I recognize, and I'm sure you agree, tell me if you don't, that the property development actually looks into 3 segments. The first is all what we do until the construction is started. That's one risk, which includes the buying and the planning. The second risk is the construction. And the third risk is the exit. It really is important to understand all of that, because anything can shift during any time. And I'll give an example in one of my projects after this. And finally is the timeline, really, because if I have to earn £1,000 in 6 months and I go opt for a development which is going to be literally taking me 2 years to complete, it's just not going to be helping me. So it's really is important for me to understand this CERT model on where I am, and based on that, I will choose what is the best strategy for me. And once we have all of them, what we call your development can be certified for your own self, really, and by your own self. Shall I, do you have time? Do we have time to share an example of my property?
Well, what I thought we might do is try, before we do that actually, is to jump in, just slightly conscious of time actually, Vik, if that's okay.
Yeah.
What I thought we'd try and do is do a new thing actually, a new thing at Nimbus, which is Nimbus story time. That's kind of what I kind of got in my head as an idea. So bear with me, because it sounds mental, but let me just try and see if we can do something interesting here. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to, this is like the prop tech equivalent of story time, or kind of Whose Lines It Anyway, or something like that. It's kind of one of these sort of, I think it's like 1990 something, Whose Lines It Anyway, but that sort of thing in effect, where we have no particular script. And what I want to do is I wanted to get the audience to pop into the chat. So if you open up the chat for me and type in off the back of one of the strategies that Vik's talked about, type in a location and the strategy that you put in there. And what we're going to do is we're going to go and try and use Nimbus to go and tell a story. That's my plan. So what I would like you to do is to do that for me. So Wayne's popped one in. So we've got Gateshead commercial to residential for Mubin. We've got Manchester development. Any more for any more? Gosh, lots coming through. Northampton for HMO. Oh, we've got an MA. Orpington in a used class MA. So let's try that. Does that sound good, Vik? Or do you want to pick one out of the chat, Vik? Do you want to kind of do an eeny, meeny, miny, mo? Or kind of, I feel like it's the pick a card, any card kind of bit here. Do you want to pick one out of there, or?
Let's look into the MA, the midst. Let's look into the Orpington.
Orpington. Okay, fabulous. So what we're going to do is we are going to jump into Nimbus. This is Nimbus Maps. This is kind of, in case me doesn't know what that is, this is what it is. What it's done is it's found Orpington. So in effect, it's like a Google powered search. It's kind of found that location. It's plotted a load of ownership. These little outlines that it's sort of plotting on the map here are ownership. It's kind of land registry types in effect that it's plotting. Now, we're going to be doing use class MA. So all this stuff is kind of clickable. We're going to kind of come back to that in a second. So I'm just going to clear that search for now. And we're going to use the Elite Plus system to start with. So what I want to do here is I want to go into this little section over here. This is the Elite Plus system. We've got the new class MA strategy. So what the class MA strategy says is you can take a used class E building and you can convert that to residential subject to a few little constraints. You can't do it in Article 2.3 areas. You can't do it to various buildings like that. But provided it's in that right use class, then it's then provided then it's not in say Article 2.3, it's not in Greenbelt, not in OMB, not SSI, and all that kind of stuff. Then we can start to think about converting it. Now, the first thing we need to be thinking about is what are the values in that area. So I have no idea where Orpington is whatsoever. So the first thing to understand, in fact, let's just kind of switch that off for a second. The first thing to understand is have we picked a difficult place here first? So the first thing I want to do is I want to overlay onto the map what average residential values are, because the reason, if we're looking at commercial conversions, we want to make sure that there's some value in that area for us to go and convert these buildings. Obviously, that's going to start to give us an indication of what that top line, the GDV of our converter scheme is going to look like. And I suppose as part of this, depending on the kind of scheme that I want to go and do, there's probably parts of town I want to stay away from. So if I'm looking at the social housing element of things, I can probably go into the worst parts of town, and actually that's where I'm probably going to get interest in the social housing to read up sites out there. If I'm going to do swanky, nice new flats that I'm going to sell off as executive homes, and I want to pick the better parts of town. So this little overlay here, this average residential value overlay, plots neighborhood boundaries across the map, and it looks across those areas and says, what's the average sales prices in there? So fortunately, off the back of, Deborah hasn't thrown me a sort of hospital pass here. She's chosen Orpington, which is actually quite an affluent area. So we've got kind of what we can see here is that Orpington here has sort of average sales price of about $450 a foot. Down south, there's kind of tickles up to $480. Sort of northwest, it sort of goes up to $560. And there's kind of a weaker patch kind of north of Orpington. Actually, kind of disappear out to the east, the values disappear off too. But as we kind of go southwest down sort of through sort of past Chesterfield and out towards down towards the airport there, actually we get some stronger values there as well. So it's giving me that kind of little understanding of what are the areas, what are the values in that area, of course. I suppose one of the things we've sort of I'm particularly bothered about is then, are there any HMOs in an area? Because I quite like the idea of we're going to convert some of this stuff. And I know that Class MA doesn't naturally convert to, you've got to go for a planning application to go and get your HMO use after that. But we can perhaps have a look at some of the HMO stuff around as well, because actually we want to be looking to say, well, is there an HMO marketplace? Well, there's a few HMOs. That's what this kind of showed me. There are a few HMOs in the area. I can't use my Class L when it comes to Class MA, so I can't use the C3 to C4 development rights as part of that. But interestingly, I could use the new Class G actually, which kind of then back to back that with Class L, which kind of could be interesting, because the new Class G, which was shopped with uppers, has now become commercial with uppers, it seems, or Class E with uppers. So kind of that perhaps could be interesting. So knowing there's an HMO marketplace just perhaps gives me a number of different ways in which I could consider some of these buildings. So I'm starting to get a feel for what this area is. I'm kind of comfortable that there's value in that area, kind of that £400 a foot, 450, pushing kind of 550 in sort of that northwest patch becomes interesting. There's a bit of an HMO marketplace there, not a huge one, but a bit of an HMO marketplace. Actually, we could look at some of the other technical strategy, the other strategies, sort of see kind of how the HMO marketplace sits, because that might be interesting too. And I sort of a few comments in the chat around HMOs too. So we could always look at that in a moment. But in essence, what I want to do then was drop into this class MA strategy in effect. So this is the new class MA. In effect, what it's doing is picking out those class E buildings across the map. So that's now bringing that broader use class of doctors' surgeries and vets and all of that good stuff. It's then overlaying a kind of residential feel to that location. So one of the key things we need when we're looking at commercial conversions, or indeed any other kind of flats on top of flats and this kind of stuff, we want to make sure that there's a marketplace for that. So first off, is there value for that? And secondly, is this building in an area where there's other residential around it? And then that means that when we then go forward and say, well, look, we built a nice new residential house or a nice new block of flats or whatever it is, there's a marketplace that's kind of expecting it. We're not shoving it into the middle of an industrial estate somewhere and trying to sell a block of flats in the middle of, so it's baking that into that search, if you like. So let's just have a little zoom in and let's have a look and see what we get. And kind of there's quite a lot of class E along the high street, which perhaps is a little bit obvious. Let's have a look. That looks like it might be a little day nursery actually. So let's have a look at this and see what that is. So this is what this is highlighting here. This is saying that actually in this part of Orpington, there's actually a little day nursery that's around the corner. And kind of one of the things around day nurseries, often they trade quite well, but kind of what's interesting now is that obviously with day nurseries being under class E now, the idea of relocating these buildings is actually quite simple. So actually, could that day nursery relocate into an old office somewhere or something like that? Actually, that's now the same use. So actually, kind of some of this stuff where before you think this is all a bit tricky, you kind of think, well, actually, some of this relocation stuff might work quite neatly. So what's gone off and does, it's found this sort of 2,000-foot day nursery in effect. It's looked at the GDVs and it's saying that the sales prices for new build properties around there for about 540 quid. We looked at the average sale price at 450. So that's kind of the good, bad, and the ugly kind of the avocado bathroom suites as well as the Villa Royal and box stuff. It's kind of bringing both of those together and averaging them. So the new build stuff, when you do your nice new conversions or perhaps a more comprehensive scheme on this particular property, will bring a higher value up to on that. So that's coming back at 540. It's then doing a conversion cost, which in Orpington, it's saying that sort of 2/3 of new build costs across Orpington is about £115 a foot. So it's got a new build cost about £200 a foot, I suspect, something like that in the background here. What it's then saying is that the predicted rent for that building then is £19.50. And it's done that off the back of looking at what the rate assessment was and looking at where that kind of sat back in 2015 and then sort of brought that forward to kind of an estimate of what today's rent is. And then so if we pay a sensible yield for that, if we pay 6% net initial yield for that particular building, then what it brings back is it says, well, actually, the conversion costs are sort of 250, something like that, to convert this couple of 1,000 square foot nursery. You can buy it for 650 based off 1950 a foot rental level, a 6% net initial yield off the back of that. It'd be worth 1.15 as part of that, which gives us sort of £250,000 profit off that scheme. And that breaks back to about a 30% return on cost in effect. So that's kind of all interesting. It's sort of helping us understand what's the purchase, so what's the value of this building. And I suppose what we can then start to do is say, well, who are the owners of this building? So my next job is to start saying, well, actually, that's all well and good identifying values and kind of, well, this has got firstly a sort of a clear route through on planning with the new class MA in Orpington and sort of trying to pick out something a bit more tricky to find than a shop with some uppers or something like that. So sort of trying to be a little bit more creative around all of this. So what it's now saying is that this property is owned, it's a class E, it's a children's nursery and creche. Down here, it's saying this property was actually bought in January 2009 by a company, Sasha Holdings Limited. This company here is, it's kind of one of sort of the important things here is to understand who these people are and what's interesting actually, who these people are and kind of what their motivations are. And what it's saying is that Sasha Holdings Limited actually was dissolved recently. So we've got a kind of a sort of a slight problem here in the background here. So there's the application to do that. And of course, then down here, we've got the people sat behind the business as well. So Mukesh Shah is the person that is the one to go and get in touch with that particular property. So it's still shown as being held and owned by them. And we can actually go and see that property portfolio as well, plotted across the map, which kind of could also be interesting. So this is a company that's got problems. If I just remove that that strategy overlay for a second, this then is the portfolio of that company that's then had this application to strike off. So we've got a property in Orpington, it's got a property out in Bromley, it's got a property down in Edenbridge as well. So perhaps we go and have a look at the Bromley one as well and see what else. So that was the Orpington one, that's a little day nursery that's still registered. And they've then got another building over here, which is a second nursery actually. So they've got another one with a little flat above it, or two flats above it rather. So suddenly we've got this sort of interesting thing where we've got this sort of two-day nurseries owned by a company that have got these kind of major financial problems and has an application to strike them off, which kind of all seems kind of interesting, really, sort of to go and see kind of what they're up to in effect. So what we can then start to understand maybe is perhaps that little local marketplace. So if I want to go and approach them and I get some interest in that, how do I understand what these things are worth? We can then start to look at commercial comps, commercial availability. So what are the properties that are on the market commercially in a particular area? Get into that into the market section here. We have this commercial availability, and what this now shows us is the various properties that are on the market. And obviously we're now in Bromley, and it's sort of moved across where we were a moment ago. This then helps us to understand. So here's some office buildings that are on the market and kind of quoting price and this sort of stuff, helping us to understand what that little local marketplace might look like. So that's my sort of showing you the route through. I suppose one of the tricks then is, so if I want to go and mail campaign and sort of speak to these owners, try and get some interest in these properties, then of course what I want to be able to do is to then be able to save that property into a way of mail campaigning them in effect. And so what we have, a little workflow section, a little tool here, we can pop this, sort of save this property into there. That'll put a little pin on it, kind of allow me to understand all of that. It'll pop it into my workflow here, where I can then download my workflow. This is going to list all the properties that are in my workflow down here that I found on various webinars and this sort of thing. That will give me a nice, neat way of mail campaigning this particular company. I suppose the other thing that I was kind of interested in is working out a way of getting in touch. So I can obviously write a letter to Sasha Holdings at 19 Bromley Grove. That would be fine, thanks very much. My kind of fear around that is, well, an application to strike off, what do we do? What perhaps could be interesting is if I can get lucky with a planning application on this particular property, which I've got actually here. There's some applications here for various things. Actually, two of them are refused. This is the applications for the particular property itself. What that will give me is a live application that was submitted on that property, which I could then perhaps go and see, well, does that give me an architect that knows that property, that knows the owner of that property, that I can then go and get in touch with? Just waiting for that to load up and just check whether when they bought this one, because it may be that they bought it after the event. They bought that in 2019 actually, so that's not going to be ideal because this is an application from before that. But the idea was, you know, could I go and find off the back of the further information here who the architect was that acted on behalf of the owner of that property? And I was hoping that actually that application would have been a bit sort of later than this, so I could then see from 2019, if I'd got an application from 2020, then it would have been Sasha Holdings that has submitted that application, that I could then go and sort of ring the architect. So I want to speak to your client at Sasha Holdings. Could you put me in touch or give them a call and have a chat to them about that in effect? So that's what I was hoping for, was kind of finding some contacts for Sasha Holdings that might give me a different way, rather than just trying to write to Mukesh at 194 Edgebury Lane, or indeed over here at in fact there's the address there. I suspect that might be from the administrators, obviously. So so that's what I was thinking. I suppose what I would be interested in looking at is sort of how can I find, if I can go and get one of these properties bought, and I can go and get some interest from Sasha Holdings. I suppose some of the things that could be interesting then is saying, well, actually, how could I find out who I could go and let this, how could I find out who might go and back me on a scheme like this? Who might go and sell this scheme to? If I go and get a planning consent to convert it under Class MA, who might I go and sell that to? We've got a suite of things we can do. So we've got a sort of a comparable search that would show you properties that have recently sold. And we've got a planning export in here that would allow me to go and do a search, say for residential opportunities. I'm just going to find out which council we're in. I guess we're in Bromley now. Let's have a quick look and just see where we are. So we're in Bromley here. What we can then do is say, well, actually, let's go and search Bromley, London Borough for residential planning applications to, in effect, build residential out in a particular location across Bromley. So I can just export that. So what this is doing like a keyword search. It's saying, show me planning applications that mention residential keywords, mention C3, mention kind of development of residential, this sort of stuff. And I might go and look at that and say, well, where do I see the word conversion maybe in there? Because that then means that the application then is looking at a converted scheme rather than a new build scheme. What it's then doing is saying, well, go and find all those planning applications. It's going to show what it's searching for at the moment. It's searching for residential, C3, flats, apartments, houses, dwellings. It's kind of removing some of the clutter around that. So when you do that search, you're going to find discharge conditions and kind of this sort of administrative stuff that goes on after a planning application or a planning permission comes in, where it's sort of, you know, discharging condition 5 off the back of, well, here's a brick that shows you're going to build, and this kind of rubbish. So it's removing all of that stuff out of the search in effect, and then it's linking all of that through to the ownership. Now, the reason I want to go and do that is sort of a few fold. So this is the thing that the system's just kind of generated for me in effect. I'm just going to enable the editing. So it's giving me a link through to the planning application that's being found. It's giving me then details of that planning application. So let's have a look. So down here, we've got I'm just the word Class E here, which kind of was always kind of interesting. Change of use of part of ground floor Class E to C3 and this sort of stuff. But I'm going to look at this one. So proposed extension alteration, existing building to create 8 apartments and associated works. So that went in April of this year. There's the address of it in Beckenham. There's the title number for it. And what I can see is that All Time Securities bought that property, in fact in 1966. That's kind of perhaps less interesting for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just filter some of this for a second. So what I want to do is I want to find residential planning applications that have changed hands recently. So if I then go forward to the people that bought that particular property and say, well, I've got another one, I've got this kind of interesting position with this company called Sasha Holdings. They've had an application to strike off recently, and off the back of that, they own these different nurseries and convert those under Class MA into residential. Would you be up for backing it, or would you like to just buy it off me and I'll just get the planning gain and sell it on to you? Would you be interested in that? Well, the people that will be prepared to do that are people that have bought properties recently. So they've bought properties in the last, say, 3 years or something. If they've done that and then submitted residential planning applications on them, or indeed there's application gone in and they've bought it after the event, then those people are going to understand that residential marketplace, going to understand how all this fits together. So what I can do here is I can just say, well, show me all those properties that have had a residential planning application submitted and that have changed hands in the last 3 years in that location. So what I suddenly find is I've got a list here of lots of little local developers who then, if I wanted to go and take my particular scheme forward, these few properties that are sat within Sasha Holdings, that presumably has had an application to strike it off, then the question is, well, kind of what's happening to those properties? Where are they currently sat? And how is that going to get taken to market? And can I get myself on the end of all of that? Well, here's a list of people that are across Bromley developing submitting residential planning applications that have bought on properties that they've bought very recently, in effect. So here's a list of people that I can go and get in touch with. So would you like to go and buy this stuff? Would you like to pay me an action fee? Would you like to back me to develop it and hold the investment at the end of the day? What would you like to go and do? And of course, what I've also got within this is the price that they paid. So if I've got a 2,000 square foot building that's going to be 600 grand, is what Nimbus was saying on the Class MA strategy, then who are the right people to go and buy this off me? Well, down here, you've got Chartwell Land and New Homes that paid a couple of million quid for sites. They're quite big compared to what I'm looking for. But there's kind of a few people down here that are 600 grand. So, you know, Keswick Homes and BMR, Norbury and this sort of stuff, they're in the right kind of ballpark for the kind of scheme that we're then going to be putting forward, given the size of the stuff that this company, Sasha Homes, have invested, sort of hold rather. And what's kind of then also interesting is that when you go across to the far right-hand side, what you can see is that, for example, these people use Savills. They used Alice Higgett at Savills to go and do their planning application for them. So quite quickly, I can start to see, well, who are the local active developers that are doing things across Bromley, and who are they then trusting their schemes to in order for them to go and take those applications forward, in effect. So suddenly I have a list of locally active architects and planners that are working for the local developers. If I want to go and submit a planning application to that location, they're the people to go and get in touch with. So that was my story time with Nimbus, in effect, is how can we go and find some stuff with, say, a class MA? How can we then go and understand who the people are behind that? That's that kind of the financial bit has been checked, the planning bit has been checked in terms of, is it viable to get a planning ticket on it? Would it financially stack up as part of that? And then who are the people I should go and get in touch with, whether that's looking for investors, companies that are buying stuff nearby, or indeed who their consultants might be that we can go and get in touch with. So hopefully that was helpful. I suppose what I tried to bring to life was, rather than have a static set of slides, is kind of bring this to life for you, really, which is how Nimbus can kind of help. It's volume, direct to vendor site finding, and there's 8 ways to find land with the Elite platform. There's 9 strategies that help you with those commercial conversions, and actually as part of that, which I didn't show you, which perhaps I should have done, there's actually separate buttons around those strategies for each of those things that Vik's been talking about today. So the Class ZA strategies, the Class A, AA, and AB. This was kind of my take, because I said before that the ZA is the kind of the commercial stuff. You knock it down and rebuild it with 2 stories on top. And then the Class A, AA, and AB is really just blocks of flats with airspace above it. It doesn't matter then whether the ground floor is commercial or not. And hence the sort of, we've lumped those together into a single strategy rather than breaking those out into separate classes. And then Class AC and AD then is the airspace above houses, of course. So I'd say this is what I was trying to bring to life, really, was just how Nimbus helps with the 8 ways to find land, the 9 Elite Plus strategies, helps with valuation, whether that's commercial comparables or commercial availability. And actually, it's got the residential comparables in there as well. So there's a separate feature I didn't show you today, which is sort of saying, well, what are those sales prices? What are the buildings that have sold within that area, that can allow us really to pin down and get really comfortable with that appraisal as part of it. And also helps you identify the right architects and the right power team to build sort of around you. For me, if you can find a decent architect that really understands that scheme you're putting forward, whether that's knocking down a commercial building and rebuilding flats, or whether that's airspace, or whether that's simple conversion of an office to resi or something like that, if they really understand that marketplace, they really understand that kind of that particular opportunity, then first they're designing it in the right way, so they're understanding all the British standards. You need to be understanding all that kind of stuff. They'll have the ear of the local authority. They'll know who the local planning policy officer is. They've done a scheme elsewhere that's really similar. They'll know kind of the problems that are being faced. They'll be designing all of that into your scheme for you. And of course, they'll also recommend you a decent M&E consultant, a decent QS, and all that kind of stuff, or EA, or depending on how you're going to procure this sort of stuff. So actually, if you can get one good member of a good team, then they'll bring the rest of the team with them and kind of give you some recommendations around all of that. And of course, the other thing it'll do is help find investors. So we can understand who the people are that are buying similar things, that perhaps will put money into your schemes going forward. So hopefully that's been useful. And we're gonna run a poll in a minute just to sort of see whether that was useful. We thought he who dares Rodney wins. So we thought we'd just go on a little journey and sort of see where it takes us to. So here at Nimbus, we can do a number of things to help out. So if you want to try the system for 14 days, you're welcome to do that. Equally, if you'd like to have a one-to-one demonstration with us, then you can do that too. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just drop a little link into the chat. If people want to book a call with us, just to either claim your 14-day free trial of the Elite system, or indeed to have a call with us to work out whether perhaps Elite Plus is right for you, or Elite is right for you, or indeed just have a go with the system too, then there's a link in the chat that will take you through to one of the team here at Nimbus that can then run you through that. Vik, how can you help if people have kind of got issues and stuff like that and they want some help? How can you guys help?
Well, first of all, you should learn the rules of the game. Because again, finding the property, which is again Nimbus, I've used Nimbus myself for 2 years. From the last 2 years, are fantastic to help me to able to qualify the deals very, very quickly. But again, to be able to understand the rules of the game, really, to starting from how we start, first of all, as I mentioned, starting from the evidence of how is it going to be profitable, what strategies are going to be working out well for me. And throughout the journey of finding properties, again, Nimbus is an amazing tool. We're talking about all the rules like CDM, we're talking about all the insurances, we're talking about how to source the deal, how to calculate the numbers. Yes, again, this is amazing that the systems can help us to give us the overall values. But again, you need to be really able to understand how to calculate the whole development process and what it involves in the total gross development value. Looking at all the deal analyses, building the power team. Again, the bigger part, as I mentioned, the 3 elements to planning, the risk I mentioned, up till start the construction. We start the construction is one phase. We start the construction is a second phase, and then the exit is a third one. And so many things change during this time to be able to have that power team financing the deal. Again, on the land and property development course, which is the 2 power pack training days, we have a planning consultant teaching us all how they can capitalize all the PD rights, all the elements that we can utilize. And then we have got a financial broker going through how, as a first-time developer, you can tap into the finance, and they explain all the do's and don'ts with all the exercises. And throughout the day, we just some of the time they become an architect, Paul, because I give them they do. I give them the floor plans, or build yourself a block of flats. How are you going to do that? Because as you mentioned, once you have the knowledge, once you have the tools, you can actually figure it out. What is the possibility we could have? Now, the 2 days training plan starts how you start from the development, from the buying, financing, completing power team, learning all the CDMs, to the throughout until you finish, until you exit, how you design the property, how you assess the market, etc. It just covers everything, which is fully packed, 2 training days, again, run by the expert team who are developers. Access to industry experts. I mentioned our planning consultant, the financial broker. Yes, we do look after in this plan, in this training 2 days, lunch and refreshments are included. And we have the opportunity to network with the giants. And what we call giants are the people who are successful property investors, who are actually doing it right now, rather than people who have just done it in the past. And it's COVID safe, as per in line with the government guidelines. It's just keeping everybody safe is the top priority. Now, this program comes up at $999, and today we have an amazing offer. So if you use the code Nimbus, you can save 20% on the 2 days training. So it will only cost you $799. I reckon the link will be emailed to yourself. Yes, look forward to welcome you and take you on a journey how you can get into the property development and enjoy all the things we've discussed today.
Fabulous. I sort of conscious of time. We're running a little bit late here. So the other thing we can do here is we have some follow-up webinars here at Nimbus. So if you'd like to join us, we have a sort of a Find, Assess, Connect webinar. It's going to take you through some of the basics of Nimbus that perhaps I've kind of skipped across a little bit today, sort of to try and take you on a journey rather than show you all the kind of the nuts and bolts of the system. If anyone would like to join us for that, that's tomorrow at 11 o'clock. And equally, I have a commercial conversions deals clinic where I'm going to be inviting Ranjan Bhattacharya back. He's been on a couple of webinars with us for the last couple of weeks, and he's going to join me on a deals clinic where you can bring your deals to us, and we'll have a look at them and sort of give you some sort of a feel about what we think of those, and perhaps some things you could perhaps think about on those deals too. So if you'd like to join us for any of that, or indeed if you'd like to get in touch, or like Fielding Financial to get in touch with you, then just launch a little poll here which will allow you just to fill out for us. So the first question, if you'd like to discuss the land and property development course with Fielding Financial, that first question's for you. If you'd like to come along to the deals clinic tomorrow with myself and Ranjan at 2 o'clock tomorrow, that second question's for you. And then if you'd like to join us on our sort of Find, Assess and Connect webinar tomorrow, which is where we'll take you through the sort of the basics of the of the elite platform. We show you how all that kind of fits together. Then that third question's for you. We're going to just take a moment for a quick break, ready for our live Q&A session, where we've got about sort of 10-15 minutes. Where what we'll do is we'll get you to come forward and ask your questions to us, and we'll answer them live for you right now. So you give us 2 minutes just to come back and fabulous. So, what I'd like to do is bring Vik back. So if you've got a question you'd like to ask us, then what I'd like to do is just open up the little control panel here on Zoom. And if you just, there's a raise hand button on that. So if you just click on the raise hand button for me, then that will alert us here up at the front here that you've got a question that you want to ask. There is one in the chat. So Steve has raised a question. In fact, he's put his hand up. So there we go. Let's see if we can get. He's just put it down again. Did you want to ask it live, Steve, or do you want to want me to answer it on the sort of through the chat? So questions that sort of two questions that he's raised. So the first one is around the PD rights for Class MA. So that's sort of looking at the nursery. How am I going to prove that it's no longer necessary as to sort of be in that location? Well, the answer to that is that. I'm just going to close the thing. So typically, sort of my experience of this has been sort of putting these things in the market. So we did an awful lot of work in the pub sector, where we were sort of looking at a similar sort of thing. You know, is that pub still necessary? And sort of what often was the case, you put it on the market for a little while to kind of prove that. I think what's kind of interesting in today's world, though, when it comes to nurseries and saying, well, actually, kind of, is that needed in that particular location or not? What I think you might find is that it's not so much as it needed in that location, is could it be relocated actually? And so obviously with the new wider use Class E, could you relocate that into a different site that perhaps is perhaps better suited for them or something like that? So I think the kind of question around that could be kind of quite easily dealt with. It's a lot easier now, given there's sort of a much wider use class across all of that. Hopefully that's kind of answered the question. The second question then was kind of how do we compare to one of our competitors, a company called Land Insight? And I suppose my short answer to that is that I think they're kind of very interesting as a tool for large scale development, finding a piece of land on the edge of a settlement, trying to build 100 homes on the edge of that settlement. I think where we're very strong is when it comes into the settlements, and when you start looking at individual properties, trying to convert those, trying to find little bits of land, and sort of building new build within the settlements. I think we're a much stronger platform on that. In that case, I think we probably do some other bits around the connection, looking at who the right people are to work with, things like land comparables that they'll sort of help you find a piece of land on the edge of the settlement. But I don't really believe they kind of quite get to that level of detail around that. I mean, both systems will give you, you know, what residential sales values are in an area and this sort of stuff. But I think there's sort of the commercial piece. I think we do better than they do, and I think some of that stuff around land comparables and who the right power team are and this sort of stuff, I think is sort of a bit of a differentiator.
Paul, can I ask on the first question on how you're going to prove? My experience with anything which forms a part of the community asset, that you need to do a bit of a feasibility study to be able to ensure, because council, what they don't want to do is to annoy the community and close something and move something else. Again, I'm working with a pub at the moment, and again, they are very hot on really involving the local community on that angle. So just to ensure the feasibility study is done properly on that. So
sure,
thought on that.
Absolutely.
So,
Brijesh has got his hand up at the moment. Let's just see if we can invite him up to speak. Brijesh, just trying to unmute you at the moment. We'll see if we can get you to ask your question. I think his hand's gone down now, actually. So I think he may not want to ask that question. Now, maybe that's his hand has been left up as he's been playing around with the control panel. So there's some more questions in the chat. Nobody's got their hands up at the moment. So let's just see any kind of questions in the chat that you've seen, Vik, through there.
There is one, is the question from David Griffiths, and this asked, are there contextual rules that would limit these new permission in practice? For example, how far could you go up if your building was already the same size as surrounding building? Hope that makes sense. Yes, actually, under clause AA, you could go up to 7 meters above, while you're compliant with the rest of the requirements, 7 meters above the other buildings. Whereas on the clause ACAD, for single story, you can do 3.5, and double story, you can do 7 meters as well. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. So it depends is the answer.
I've just gone through the use class, which I've gone through, but yes, they don't want, like, we have a building of 2 stories and suddenly we have a 10-story building on the side.
Absolutely, absolutely. Kind of quite an important thing. I think kind of one of the things around that as well is this kind of marketplace you're going to put it into is kind of quite important as well. And there's this idea that you could sort of almost take a terrace of houses and try and put a 4-story house in the middle of the 2-story, and kind of this. Somebody mentioned it to me as like the middle finger kind of thing, which is kind of not a particularly pleasant way of thinking of it, but in essence that sort of street scene where you've got that sort of big 4-story building, which in some respects you probably can build that in certain areas, and in some areas that kind of works. But what is that marketplace you're taking that building into, and does it work or not? It's kind of, I think, quite an important one, really.
Yeah, definitely.
Sukha put a question in saying, in general, who owns air rights in commercial property with flats above commercial units sold off on a lease?
Yes.
Is it the freeholder or the leaseholder in the flat above? This is a really good question. I do, if you want to, I've got my own. Do you want to answer that, Vik, or do you want me to do that?
Now you go for it. Got some thoughts on that. I'll share.
Yeah, so it sort of depends. Is the sort of the short answer. But if you've got, so in my head, commercial property with flats above it. So what you typically find is that so if it's commercial on the ground floor, typically that whole freehold will be owned by an investor who's holding the commercial building on the ground floor, taking a rent off the back of that, 6, 7, 8% return or whatever it is off that commercial building. And then there's some ground rents or ground leases that have been granted above them in effect. And those ground leases then grant the rights for that flat owner, flat tenant, if you like, to then go and use the space upstairs, to access through the common parts, and to drain sort of water away from it, and have water connected to it, and gas and that sort of stuff. But that's the extent of it. So typically the airspace above those kind of buildings is owned by the freeholder, who owns the sort of freehold property. It's got a commercial lease on the ground floor. The commercial tenants can use that ground floor space, but nothing else. The flat tenants then can use the common parts and so to walk through them and to bring stuff up, that kind of stuff, but nothing more. And so actually some of these are really interesting, because when you then scale that out to say, well, where's a detached block of flats that's just all flats, then of course that becomes really interesting, because then you've got, in the case of the commercial example, you've got to buy the commercial investment off that freeholder, or buy the airspace above them off them in effect. And I always think that's kind of a tricky thing. When you're buying that commercial building, you're buying the commercial investment at the same time. You're buying the income stream. So they've got 50 grand a year coming in off Sainsbury's or whatever that's rented the space downstairs. And of course, you've got to pay the going rate for that. If you then look at a block of flats that are just flats, then that ground rent's going to be a very minimal amount of money. It's going to be 100 quid a flat, and there could be 10 flats there, which means you've got £1,000 coming in rather than 50,000 coming in, which means you're paying a much smaller amount of money to go and buy that building, while still then sort of opening up the airspace potential above it, because you're buying the freehold in. And one of the things I think is sort of a slight change with that, if you're thinking about the blocks of flats, is that where it could be held by a ground rent investor, or of course it could be held by a management company. And when it's a management company, it actually it's then controlled by the owners of those flats. And that then becomes quite tricky. I always think about approaching those owners saying, well, do you mind if I come and take the roof off your nice new block of flats and build more flats on top of them while you're living there? Well, the answer to that is, well, I don't really want you to do that, thanks very much, and make all that noise and dust and, you know, all this kind of stuff. So I always think that's kind of quite tricky, although a lot of our customers have done that and do like that. We've specifically excluded that on strategy number 2, which is part of the Elite Plus system, where actually that particular strategy looks for detached blocks of flats where they're owned by investors and not as management companies, not resident associations. And so it's kind of specifically excluded that stuff so that then you've got this easier route through where you're buying an investment off an investor who doesn't really understand what the kind of airspace opportunities are. There's getting a small amount of rent coming in, which means that the purchase price is quite low. And I always kind of think that it's an interesting opportunity because the marketplace doesn't get it. The marketplace looks at that and says, well, how do I build flats on top of blocks of flats? Because I'm going to have to go and approach these owners to say, well, can I take the roof off and build space on top of them? And so I kind of think it's a really interesting opportunity. That marketplace doesn't really get it. Owners don't really get it. And yet you've got complete control of these things and scope to buy something really quite cost effectively and put this extra space on top. So I think it's a really interesting opportunity. That
it's very interesting, Paul, you mentioned, and the question also mentioned, how do you propose to solve this problem? I was looking at development in Watford, and the leaseholder asked me, what is in for me? So if I allow you to do that, what are you going to give me? And then I spoke to the freeholder who was selling the freehold, because we want to make sure I have the relationship before I want to go ahead. So at times, yes, why would somebody wants to get the roof of their place? But at times, is that something we could offer them? Now, there has been interesting 2 case studies in the High Court, and the High Court judge has, in one case, has gone against leasehold, and in one case they've gone against freehold. So it's a tricky one. I guess it's more towards working together. And I guess, again, this always works well, win-win, because they could make your life miserable all day long because of so many other regulations and legalities if you're not working together with them. So that's possibly just working together. And again, it's interesting that one case was against them and one case is in favor of them.
Yeah, sure. I suppose sort of part of that trick is obviously reading the lease and saying what the lease is granted to the tenant and what the sort of sat with the freeholder. And that's where it's all kind of boiled down to is that, in effect, you know, you've got a planning policy that's saying this is okay, we should be building above these buildings. So I think planning wise can be difficult to stop it going forward. This is kind of the whole point. What the government's trying to do is to utilize the airspace above these buildings. It's then that sort of, it will all hinge on what the lease says and what the freeholder still has retained and what hasn't been granted out of the lease. But typically, this is usually the way these things are set up, is that, you know, the tenant gets control of their own bit of flat and they have access to use the other bits of the common parts. Sometimes you can redemise the common parts as part of it anyway, so you can just move it. So and kind of a lot of the kind of tricky stuff around how do you get up there and how do you access thing and how, you know, lifts and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of covered within the PD rights as well. So I think it's a really interesting opportunity because you get sort of, if I dare say it, kind of this sort of skepticism from the marketplace going, well, it just sounds kind of too good to be true, and kind of all that's been baked into the legislation to make it kind of easy and doable. It's kind of the point of it, which is kind of where I think it's really interesting, because you sort of look at it and go, well, that seems difficult, doesn't it? And kind of when you start sort of digging through it, you go, well, actually, it's kind of not, and there's lots of positive things around it that can be done. So yeah, interesting. Hopefully that's kind of answered the question. I've sort of got a few kind of questions around that. I think hopefully we've kind of covered those off for him. I'm just conscious of time, Vik. So usually I try and get through these in sort of about an hour, and we're sort of an hour and 25 minutes in. So I think really what's left for me to do is really just to say, firstly, thank you, Vik, for your time today. Thank you for your help and for sharing your thoughts today. Great to see you.
Thank you for having me. Sorry, I could talk forever and I couldn't complete the whole subject, but thank you for having me. Really appreciate that.
Fabulous, lovely to see you. And then just finally, thank you to you all for watching. It's been really fun, interesting time. Hopefully the Nimbus story time was interesting. I've been Paul Davis. We've been Nimbus Maps. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon. All the best. Bye for now.